you want. I'm going to let
It'll
this.
be
There's a new guy
recorded.
on. Hey.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm new to your community and also new to live streaming. So if I'm messing something up, just let me know. But I had a question about. I watched the reason I ran into you was because I watched your debate with Richard Spencer and the JF guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought one of your points was about you were making, I think, what would be called a presuppositionalist argument about the epistemology behind the mechanistic point of view,
Yeah. I think
right?
that came up a little bit. I wish we talked about it more, but yeah.
And I saw your partner Posh on another. You guys do a lot of that stuff, I think, and I love that stuff. But I
Mm-hmm.
was wondering in regards to the moon stuff, and I'm just asking as someone who has no idea what is true here,
Sure.
that it seems like if you take the Venn diagram between people who have conspiracy theories and people who are paranoid, there's some intersection there, right? It's people who are kind of overly, do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Overly into them. We all think would recognize there are people who are just seeing conspiracy theories everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm saying is, I'm not in any way. It seems to me like there would be an argument that if you're arguing against, say, evolution, that you would be sort of agnostic about things like 5G, aliens. You see what I mean? Because the optics will come across that you look more like you're in that Venn diagram. I'm not saying it's true or false,
Right.
but I would see how you're now adding conspiracy theories that make for like a kind of meta conspiracy that's much
That,
more difficult to
yeah.
make the case.
Yeah. I think there's the likelihood there's a vulnerability, I would say, to going down different rabbit holes and being
Yeah,
more likely to toy with them, entertain them, right? Let's say.
yeah,
But and I could see that exists. I actually see people fall into that in these overlapping sort of truther communities where they'll just take it to like the point where they're literally just studying numbers all day to come to some conclusion about the next election or something like numerology stuff. And so
right,
there is definitely
right,
something there. I think there is probably what you would call paranoia. Probably paranoid people probably go toward conspiracy theories, but I don't think
yeah.
it means the vice versa is true, that people who are interested in conspiracies are paranoid, but it
No,
would
no,
say that
no.
paranoid people would probably be more drawn to conspiracies. But also the
Right.
concept, I don't know, how are you using the event to, how do we measure paranoia, right? It seems to be
Right.
kind of like I get it. We can kind of just accept what we mean by it. I know what we mean by it, but it's just like,
Yeah.
how would you sort of measure who's paranoid and who's not in any given set of questions, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. So my problem is the epistemological problem is who do I trust? Do I trust Jimbob? Which maybe people have watched you for a while and they're like, I trust Jimbob because he's right, but I have to kind of trust you on some personal level. And but someone coming from the outside would be like, oh, moon landings plus this. You know what I'm saying? I'm not personally
I
insulting
get
you.
no, no, I get it.
I believe you're seeking truth and you're honest, but I'm just saying why. In other words, if I'm trying to talk with someone on a bus about how evolution isn't right, and then they pick up their phone to look up a fact about it, and
Hmm.
I go, that thing's going to kill you, right? Right? You know what I mean? At a certain point, the person's like, I don't, it's just too much for me, right? So maybe you go agnostic on the phone, even if you believe there's something about the phone, because you're trying to focus on just that one point because you sincerely think this might help this person. But what I'm saying is, couldn't Richard Spencer just say, "Oh, well, you believe in the moon landing thing, right?" Is it you're giving your opponents kind of
You're
more
giving
weaponry against you?
it's yeah, you're giving them rhetorical weaponry, but really, if they were clear in their argumentation and wanted to avoid fallacies, they wouldn't use genetic fallacies. But I would agree that it opens up the conspiracy person, the me, is open to a lot of genetic fallacies that poison the well. Oh, you must believe the Earth is flat. Like you get this way of labeling people generally under an umbrella, and then anything they say after would necessarily occur as unreasonable because you've already
Yeah.
cast them into this umbrella. So yeah, we're all no matter, even if you just question like towers, how towers should fall, right? 9/11 or something. Just
Yes.
not
Yeah.
even like implying who did what, just physics. Like wait, can I question how things would fall, how they repeatedly fall in these conditions versus other conditions? Just that alone, just the question will put you into a category. And that was purposeful then. I mean, George Bush was like, all right, call these conspiracy. He basically reinvigorated the CIA word conspiracy theorist, right, to actually gaslight. So if you're asking, doesn't all of this stuff basically put us in an open target basically situation for being gaslit, and the answer is yes.
Okay. Then why not just say I'm not going to go into it? Is it just curiosity, or do you think
because I think
because I'm seeing more and more of a bigger thing going on here that all links up?
Well, it depends on your starting presupposition about the world. I believe, along with probably a lot of people here, that there is spiritual warfare and deception warfare, and that occurs. And that occurs with people who even reject sort of some of the metaphysics or supernatural aspects to, like, spiritual warfare. There's a warfare of information, at least at the physical level, where you're just battling lies, or you're infusing disinformation, which I actually admit the truther community is actually probably the most vulnerable to disinfo because of how open our antennas are. And so you can actually you can pretty much infiltrate a truther community fairly easy with a really high resonating view of something, right? And then include some sort of like Gnosticism and some sort of mysticism in there, kind of mix it up and jumble it up. And I've seen that firsthand, and I try not to do that at all. That's why I try to surround myself with people who I believe have coherent views in how to kind of like go through this stuff, go through claims and what's worth pursuing. My view overall, Ben, is that a lot of these worldly pursuits of truth, right? I don't let them weigh me down, and some other people do, and they go into paranoia, honestly. And I think that's a valid point and criticism of generally what becomes this culture of questioning all things, because you eventually lead to epistemic nihilism, where you nothing is true, right? And that actually ironically plays into a whole load of very powerful people who I believe want to create an epistemic nihilist situation where we're post-truth. You just insert inputs and your brain breaks, right? You break people, and so I don't want to play into that, and so that's why I try to remind myself to take the Christian approach. In my case, is that the warfare isn't flesh and blood. It's not worldly knowledge that makes you a better father. Maybe it makes you to know how to do something like build a house and stuff, of course. But like I'm saying, like knowing the true shape of the earth, or the truth about relativity and all this stuff, or 9/11 or any of it, it's not going to make me know how to love better, right? Or know how to love my kids better. It doesn't give me anything that I've seen that's anything that I don't already get from my faith alone. And so for me, the battle of this culture that we're actually talking about now, it is, I believe, spiritual battle. And the irony is that a lot of the pursuits end up being about the worldly knowledge, the tree of knowledge, right? Not the tree of life in my paradigm. And I try to gear toward the tree of life, something that's transcendental and not given. That's not to say that what's true in the world isn't important and worthy of pursuing, but I think there might be just some threshold at which you have to go, it's not worth it. It's like, why? Like, why am I doing this again? And I think people are finding that, at least the people I'm talking to, maybe they have kids and suddenly their world is a little bit changed, where they're like, well, I'm not going to spend 8 hours listening to someone about, but your important question is about faith or trust, let's say. Who do you trust? Where do you put your ears, right? Who do you know?
Well, I think my question is, what is the psychological impetus to, let's say, question 9/11? I understand some people say, and I think they're right, something funny goes on with our government and us. Okay, but I think there's also a limit where you have to recognize that at a certain point, I'm looking at everyone as like a Fed, or you know what I mean, like an informant, or like it it gets irrational at a certain point.
Absolutely.
And I think you would agree that that's important not to go past that line.
Totally.
But I'm not saying it's dangerous to, that like the truth is dangerous, but it may be imprudent. I don't know that necessarily with your kids you would necessarily, I'm not saying with your kids, but I'm just saying with even my kids that I would necessarily,
I think
just go full force into like demonic forces, right? In a way that they couldn't understand.
Yeah. I would say that the pursuit of the truth, as far as shining a light on what's deception, is only half a step in the view, right? Doing that alone doesn't give you much. I've seen many people, many men who have the assumed worldly knowledge of all of the deception of the world, right? They have their folders and everything, and again, like I said before, they're not necessarily alive with vitality. You know, when you see people's eyes where they're kind of deadened, it's like this thing we can't really capture, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. The deadness, that can take someone over even if they have all the knowledge they thought they needed. And so, there's definitely a threshold. I think it is that point, and I don't know if, like, let's say you had a friend, right, Ben? Like, let's say you had a friend who was into a lot of this stuff. What would be the thing that was like a red flag, such that you would intervene, where you'd be like, hey, like, you know what I mean? That threshold is different probably for different people.
I think probably a lot of people's problems or questions with authority stem from their problems with their fathers in their youth. And so there's a kind of, I think you see it a lot in atheists, almost 100% of the time. That's who they're really arguing against, right? Because it just doesn't make any sense if you don't have that problem. But to say like, you know, I'm going to make speculations about how a building would fall when a jet hit it. Like, I just don't know. And someone could say, well, think about it a little bit. But I think we should have an epistemological agnosticism. I don't think anyone really knows that. Very few people would know what a skyscraper of that size, you know what I mean?
Well, so, that particular example, I would have to disagree. That
there's a lot of engineers.
I would say, I would say,
maybe I'm wrong. Yeah,
I would say that for any given building that's demonstrably and repeatedly true, observably, that if you have a broken 1/8 of a section of a building, that 7/8 is still there. So there's tension there. That means resistance is present already. If it's standing, resistance is present. And if this top part comes down and completely destroys the rest with no resistance, but there was resistance, that means resistance disappeared somehow, and they just mathematically try to describe it to try to, this is another big thing in the truther community, especially with me, is making the very clear distinction between mathematical descriptions and explanations. And somehow we've gotten to this point, right, where whether it's astrophysics or this example we're talking, where math is okay, it's enough. As long as it mathematically makes sense, I'm not going to question anymore. And I'm saying, well, no, you can tailor math to describe something that just is, right? Because math just describes is. But explanations, I mean, you know, you need to see resistance with that kind of situation. It can't it's like saying the VW bug hit the truck, right? And it was going fast enough and established enough dynamic load power to completely obliterate the truck, right? And have no resistance. I mean, I'm talking about a bug going through a truck, right? And that's what's equivalent. And then you do some experiments, a demonstration, and people have done it with ice, people have done it with sticks. It doesn't matter because the scale doesn't change anything. It just so anything of that scale, if you remove a section and even elevate it, I've seen some demonstration, elevate it 10 feet above, when it hits, it will slow down, right? At first, it'll crush a bunch, and then the forces will even out, right? So equal force in each direction. But there's going to be a moment where all of that energy is dispersed, and that's where you actually start to see the pushback from the ground upward. We just didn't see that with three buildings, one of which wasn't hit by a plane. And so that enough, and then a bunch of physicists coming together and then getting gaslit. This is where it all started, by the way, at least in America, where you get otherwise notable working physicists, right, who come together and go, no, this is just not it, right? And then what they do, you're crazy. You're just crazy. Just gaslight the shit out of them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's because gaslighting is so prevalent and useful. It works.
But if I can just tell me if I'm taking too much of your time up. But I am sincerely just saying, like, I get it. I've seen things that I didn't used to see. Evolution, I used to believe in as a Christian, and I could see it's total murder to your belief in God. I really think so. And I think that people don't want to admit that, and they know it's true. I think evolutionists know it's true, and it's a cover-up because of prestige and all that stuff. But what I'm saying is, when you tell me a story about these like physics forces, and I trust you. I believe that that's true, and you're using authorities, which I don't know. I'm sure there are other authorities that will, right? But okay, so you're saying, but they have no reason to, right? But what it is to me is like, I watch these debate videos and people will say studies. Look, there's a study of this, right?
Yeah,
but it's all your interpretation of it. Two people in America can watch the George Floyd video and they agree this is what happened. And they will have diametrically different interpretations based on how they feel about police and black crime and drug use and all that stuff, right? So you don't really get anywhere until you get to that basic point. And I do think there are people who are into conspiracy theories because they are anti-authoritarian, because they have, in a sense, daddy issues. I don't see you having those, but you know what I mean? That's like something to really be aware of what you're bringing.
You also see the spirit in which they bring forth the information. And I judge people that way too. I don't judge their heart, but I go, oh, is it a general, like, sort of like high-pitched sort of like complaining to daddy? It's like, you're so right. Like, you get a high-pitched sort of like high register. I didn't do it. I didn't do it like this. Yeah, that's something that's there. I think the daddy thing is absolutely valid. Obviously it can't apply to everything. It's not like
it's hard to apply to say how do I know to what extent there's a psychological force within me that just hates authority? And
I would
to
say
what extent am I being honest?
I think it's our attitudes. You know, I think that's maybe what even separates me from a lot of people. In truth, are like, I'm not like, guys, hurry up, it's falling, the time is coming, the end is near. Like, I'm not pumping like fear. Yeah. I'm just going like, this is kind of funny, humorous. Sometimes I'll get passionate, but it's never like presenting something must be done immediately. We got to rally the wagons and such, because my theology doesn't really give me the road to take some utilitarian approach to a spiritual warfare. It's like having a carnal remedy for a spiritual problem, which actually brings up a funny point, which basically is your point, is that I would say the people who are blinded by their own sins and lies are more likely to be unable to see deception in the world, because they have to defend their own deception. Now, if you take the same person who's allegedly, spiritually pristine, right, and you go, oh no, I'm pristine and I've been sinless and now I can see the world. Well, if that person starts to worship worldly knowledge, they become blind to worldly knowledge too, in a way. So the same principle would apply to the fallen knowledge worshiper, the guy who started properly with, well, no, I'm looking at the world through a spiritual lens. There's some deceptive information and knowledge out there, right? There's deception, and I see it. But then if you start going toward the knowledge, and that's now your telos. That's now
knowledge, meaning secular
authority, worldly
kind of?
Naturalism, natural knowledge, knowledge of the world, physicality,
as opposed to spiritual knowledge.
Yes, as opposed to wisdom, because you can have knowledge and have no wisdom what to do with the knowledge. So those are two things. You don't find wisdom, right, as information. There's a lot of people who know stuff, and maybe they're a lack of wisdom. They don't know what to do or not do with the knowledge. Right. And so this kind of secret or esoteric knowledge or occultism that's rampant also, by the way, in truther communities. This pushes
Gnostic,
people.
right?
Yeah, generally.
Kind of feeling. We got the inside scoop.
Right. That's the irony, is that if you take that view to the extreme, you end up pursuing worldly knowledge, in which case you might not see what's true, because your own pursuit of worldly knowledge would, by your own, let's say a Christian view, your own pursuit of worldly knowledge would have to be considered a blindness.
I don't understand. You're trying to say it cuts both ways, right?
Yes.
So you can be too critical, but you can be too trusting. Is that what you're saying?
You could be, from the perspective that if you're sinful or not on like God, in my view, a Christian path, like it's a narrow path.
Yeah.
Let's say more directly your sins, like I believe you can be blinded by your sins. For the reason is not only that you're sort of tainted, you're acting against yourself, but if you're deceptive, and you know you're lying, let's say to yourself, you're actually invested in not seeing other lies, because you're protecting your own. It's like
you'll
it's
cause
like
brain damage almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Saying,
so
right?
you'll have to deal with it, right? So if that's a spiritual blemish, I would say, okay, that's true and that's consistent in my experience. And then if you take the same person who is taking that approach, and suddenly they start pursuing knowledge, and then they gain pride of the knowledge that they're getting, they're now spiritually blemished. And so the same principle would apply, and suddenly those people wouldn't see truth. They would see post-truth.
Okay.
They would see what you're talking about, where how do we even know what's true? And immediate and right around the corner from that is some sort of nihilism. Like, you don't know anything. You can't trust anybody, right? You can't trust anything. And then you get quickly to nobody can know anything for certain, right? This is.
Are you saying let's say a guy who was in a neo-Nazi, just jerks? They were just really violent, crazy, and he saw where it was leading to him, even though there may have been some things that they said that were true, but he saw that it led him in a direction where it's basically gang violence, and he renounced it, and he said, no, I'm going to really trust the mainstream thing.
Something else.
You're saying like that's also.
It'll lead
to danger, because
yeah.
he's going to kind of have no trust in anything at a certain point.
And it's really comes down to this is why it was important in that debate, but we didn't really get into it as much as we wanted, me and Posh, is that when we navigate the world, the physical world, and we use a bunch of metaphysical things, and we assume a bunch of stuff, and so when we get into what's true and tackling these issues, it's so important and relevant. A lot of people of the modern thinkers and the Enlightenment thinkers don't think it's relevant to have your worldview actually justify all of the things that you need to even have a worldview. In other words, you just take like axioms, and you take logic, and you take the fact that epistemology, or the faith in that knowledge exists at all. I mean, that's there's no evidence that knowledge exists. You have to actually start, right? And so that's why, getting into their view, we're really talking about paradigms versus paradigms, because the paradigm is then going to inform how you interpret things, which is your point. You can interpret two different things. That means you can have a false paradigm also. So then you get meta. So like, what's the paradigm of paradigms? And then you keep going until there's ultimate circularity, which in my view, of course, only God can justify absolute circularity. Right.
I had one thought, because you said to me, it doesn't really necessarily make you a better parent to know these things. But I had an experience with my kids where I was teaching them about how evolution didn't make sense. And if you understand evolution, you would see it in some level as the theory that it is from death that life emerges, from death and chaos that life emerges. And in the Christian view, the traditional non-evolutionist view, it is from God's free play in the world that life emerges. And here's my weird argument. When a child goes to the zoo, there's no reason in evolution why his face should light up and he should be delighted by the creatures that he sees. But he sees his father's playful creativity at work, and he loves it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so a child is the best argument. A child's face. Tell me how that child's face lights up.
Yep.
with a random species.
Wonderment. Wonderment has no place in naturalism. They have to just say it's an output. They have no real. It's just a
Well, they
fart.
kept saying it. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it marvelous?
Isn't it marvelous?
Isn't it amazing? Right?
No, they always
So-
grant one miracle. They start with one miracle, but then they say, I'm not taking any more miracles today, and so they always start with a miracle. Yeah, and they're in wonder. They shouldn't even be in wonder how someone can refuse evolution, because that would be a performative contradiction to their naturalistic view, where they're assuming this like metaphysical category that transcends, called experience, like this thing called experience, and then we appraise the experience, to borrow a word from Posh, and we call it something transcendental. We go, oh, wonder, the wonder of it all. This is a miraculous existence. It's just beyond me that this could exist. Well, no, a naturalist couldn't actually have that. They could have that moment, but they would have to actually put that moment and that sort of conception or description in a folder called "that must be just an illusory thing I'm feeling for the moment," right? Like, oh, it's not like, imagine the nihilist dad taking the son and the daughter to the zoo, and their eyes light up with the giraffe and the elephant, and the hippo almost comes out of the water, and there's a sense of danger, and he's like, these are all just natural outputs of our biological and physiological mental makeup, and they're like,
just
Dad.
robots.
Yeah, they're like, Dad, what is wrong with you? That's why nobody really. I actually believe that's why atheists and secularists and people who generally accept or, let's say, promote evolution kind of steer away from fatherhood. And I can't be certain for all, but there seems to be, at least in my experience, some correlation there where you're like, oh, it's not an accident that a lot of the modern naturalists are on board with not reproducing, because they actually ironically think that's a virtue, which you'd be like, there would be no difference from your worldview of procreating or not. There would be no value difference. It would just be.
And when you take your kids, I won't take up any more of your time. But just one last point. When you bring your kids, you show them nature, and you say seagulls at a beach, which are all fighting and being jerks or whatever, right? Do these animals seem like they're in this terrified state of warfare to compete, to survive? Or do they look like they're just screwing around, you know what I mean? And just sort of, they're not really eating much. If you ever watch them try to eat something, they barely eat it, and then they get in a fight. Mm-hmm. This is not an organized, this is a show for us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny to watch them, because you can identify, like, those seagulls are such assholes, excuse my language, but you know what I mean? And other animals are doing something totally different. It seems like a show rather than a terrifying death.
We're watching also like a distinction. We're always identifying a distinction between us and the animals, but we're also acknowledging similarities, and that's what humans are peculiar, because at least in my view, I believe I can justify it, but that being made in the image of God, it gives us the actual abilities to discern animal from us, but also animal in us, and that we're always in this tension between becoming animal and doing all of the things just forcefully. Just go with your wants and needs and desires. Just go for them like an animal. That's consistent with evolution. Any sort of value claims that go against your impulses, why would you do that? Like, why would you have thoughts about a thought, and then make a moral assessment of the thought, and then also we have moral assessments and actions that aren't actually consistent with serving us in the moment. Like, they don't actually give us something of utility or amenities or some sort of it doesn't give. Sometimes we actually sacrifice and lose in our moral pursuits. We actually lose in the game. If it was like a Sims game, you'd be like, oh, his attributes are down, like his fuel is down. And that's what's very unique and special about human beings, is that we can actually suspend our animalistic side of us and access metaphysical, supernatural side of us. And the naturalists can't make sense of the two. They have to be the same. They have to be one thing.
Thank you for your time. It was great.
No problem.
Thanks,
Ben.
Time.
Hey, anytime. Thanks for being here.
Right.
That was a good convo. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that.